the Honorable Hensel Daniel, Acting Premier and Minister in the Nevis Island Administration, visiting OECS Ministers of Education, and I recognize Your Excellencies and Honorables Jackie Quinn-Leandro, Petier St. Jean, Mr. Walwyn, and Mr. Edison Baird. I want to recognize our featured speaker for this evening and head of the UWI Open Campus, Mrs. Susan Sarah Owen, Mr. Bentley Brown, Director of Social and Sustainable Development at the OECS Secretariat. I want to recognize our Permanent Secretary here, Mrs. Ione Libert-Willett, and other Permanent Secretaries who are here present, notably the Permanent Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Astona Brown. I recognize Mr. Marcellus Albertin from the OECS Education Reform Unit, former ministers, Messieurs Rupert Herbert and Cedric Liburd, former for different reasons, I suspect, and former Minister Rupert Herbert, having held the post from 1995 until 2000. Reverend Canon Isaiah Phillip and his dear wife, and Reverend Christopher Archibald, who gave the invocation, members of the Diplomatic Corps, including our ambassador from the Republic of Cuba, Jorge Paire Zubiar, representatives of regional, international, and other organizations, local, for example. And among you, I recognize Mr. Mansfield Blackwood from the USAID, Kim Sandy Lewin from UNESCO, Dr. Jennifer Obida from UWI, Teacher Education and the Joint Board of Teacher Education, other partners from the region and perhaps beyond, our Chief Education Officer, Ms. Clarice Cotton, Education Planner, Mr. Quinton Morton, our education officers who are here present, Director of Early Childhood, Mrs. Jacqueline Morris, and these are all important people in education. I have to enumerate them, please. Principals and directors of educational institutions, teachers who are here, I recognize some of you, members of the Board of Directors of the Clarence Fitzroy Bryan College, members of the media, and I must recognize, as I almost forgot, our Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health, Mr. Andrew Skerritt, and our National Secretary General of UNESCO, Mr. Antonio Maynard. But I think best of all, we must recognize and again applaud the members of the Keon High School Steel Orchestra, Ms. Junica Berry and Kwacha Boche. I almost forgot to mention someone. And the PS herself would testify that transitioning post-Osmond Petty in the Ministry of Education has been challenging. And so we want to recognize Mr. Osmond Petty, who has been a bulwark of planning and administration in the Ministry of Education. Ministers, colleagues, delegates, friends, members of the media, it is a distinct honor for me on behalf of the Ministry of Education and Information, and indeed the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, to extend a warm welcome to all delegates of the 22nd OECS Ministers of Education meeting, being conducted under the theme, OECS Education, Contributing to a Deeper, Stronger Economic Union. We warmly welcome our brothers and sisters, friends and colleagues from the OECS member states, and more than ever before, as we take firm, confident, and unyielding strides towards the full economic and political integration of the OECS member states, not the least among which is the inauguration of the OECS Assembly this coming June. This is beginning to feel like, in a real sense, welcoming neighbors and friends from next door. Equally enthusiastically, I welcome our development partners and colleagues who have always demonstrated a more than keen interest, in fact, a palpable interest in the social, economic, and political development and evolution of our people and our region. And so, that St. Kitts and Nevis has been chosen as the venue for the seminal conference we, having last hosted in 2005, delights, heartens, and gratifies us all. It can and perhaps ought to be said without fear of contradiction that St. Kitts and Nevis, and I'll boast, in its educational development in particular, always has been a leader in the Anglophone Caribbean and even beyond. St. Kitts and Nevis has been reputed, for example, its early promulgation of universal secondary education in excess of 40 years ago, and admittedly inspired a regional movement in this regard. St. Kitts and Nevis has long embraced the philosophical moorings encapsulated in the UNESCO-promoted theme, Education for All. Equitable access to primary and secondary education has been one of the hallmarks of the education system in St. Kitts for many, many years. Professor Emeritus, the Honorable Errol Miller, in his 2010 CDB-sponsored study of the educational development of St. Kitts and Nevis between 1991 and 2008, was careful to draw this particular distinction. And he wrote, St. Kitts and Nevis, however, has followed a uniquely different policy path with respect to the placement of students of mixed abilities in all public secondary schools, including those of former elite status, based upon performance on the test of standards as opposed to common entrance examinations. As such, the criteria of transparency and equity in the placement of students in public secondary schools are met. At the same time, this policy path virtually assures that no public secondary school, and I hope our principals would agree, can be said to be placed at a disadvantage in terms of the quality of students who are placed in them. End of quote. Today, even as we speak, education as it ought has been recognized at the highest levels of government as a fulcrum upon which every aspect of our national development turns. Our association with the most progressive educational policies has been renowned for years. Just over a month ago, April 2nd to 4th, St. Kitts hosted a conference on early childhood development in the Caribbean themed Towards Poverty Reduction, maximizing the returns on investment in early childhood development in the Caribbean. That conference deliberated on policies, strategies, and actions to optimize early childhood development in the Caribbean. Over 60 participants from around the region gathered here to address this important issue of improving the early childhood sector as we recognize the centrality of a sound educational exposure at this critical stage of life to the maximum development of our local human capital. From the reports and feedback, the workshop has been a resounding success, and we look forward to the implementation of ideas promulgated and strategies developed to positively impact all levels of education in the months and years ahead. Likewise, we are confident that this OECS Ministers of Education conference will not just incorporate the outputs of that conference held earlier this year, but in a similar manner, be successful in forging stronger links of collaboration, enhancing the delivery of high-quality education, and furthermore, advancing our integration agenda in the OECS region. St. Kitts and Nevis, like all others, has been a primary beneficiary of these exercises, as some of the greatest minds and most influential and strategic thinkers in education throughout the region and beyond gather to our shores to discuss. The broad objectives of this seminal conference, which begins in earnest tomorrow, include our engagement in constructive dialogue on substantive issues regarding educational development in our sub-region, agreeing on policies and strategies to advance our educational agenda, and urgently, I perceive, securing the support and collaboration of regional and hopefully international agencies and development partners. Out of this meeting shall emerge, I believe, the essence of what will become our new OECS education sector strategy, an agreed set of imperatives that should drive the philosophy, ambitions, policies, and goals in the education sector for the next 10 years. Here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we are 3 years into the implementation of our latest educational policy, termed the White Paper on Education Development and Policy 2009 to 2019, with the underlying theme, raising the standard, maximizing resources, aligning with best practices promoting success for all. This policy document sought to harness to a significant extent the policy recommendations and strategies encapsulated in the 2000 OECS Education Sector Strategy Paper, Pillars for Partnership and Progress, particularly with regard to the subject matters of male underachievement, violence prevention and mitigation, among other important matters.